I'm about to show you something that most lawn care companies hope you never figure out. A common household mineral, sitting in your bathroom cabinet right now, that can take pale yellowing grass and turn it deep green again. No nitrogen, no phosphorus, no branded lawn food. Just a mineral you've probably used for a sore muscle bath and never once thought to put on your lawn. This isn't a miracle cure, and I'm not going to pretend it is. I've seen too many gardening videos oversell this exact product with dramatic before and after thumbnails, and I genuinely don't want to be one more voice adding to that noise around something that only works under specific conditions. But when it works, and I'll tell you exactly when it works and when it categorically won't, it works because of real, well-understood plant biology, not because of marketing copy written by someone who's never actually run a soil test. And once you understand the biology behind it, you'll know exactly whether your yellow grass is a genuine candidate for this fix, or whether you're dealing with something else entirely that this specific product simply cannot touch, no matter how much of it you apply. The product is Epsom salt. Chemically, it's magnesium sulfate. You can buy a bag at any pharmacy or grocery store for about $5, and that bag will treat a full lawn multiple times over across an entire season. You've walked past it in the same aisle as foot soak products and bath salts 100 times, without ever connecting it to your yard, filed away in your head as a bath product and nothing more. But before I tell you how to use it, I need to explain what's actually happening in your grass when it turns yellow, because this is the part that determines whether Epsom salt will genuinely help you or completely waste your time and money. Let's talk about why grass turns yellow in the first place, because there are actually several different reasons, and Epsom salt only addresses one specific one of them. Yellowing in grass, what horticulturists call chlorosis, happens when the plant can't produce enough chlorophyll, the green pigment that captures sunlight and drives photosynthesis. There are several distinct reasons a lawn can turn yellow. Nitrogen deficiency is the most common one by far, and that's what most branded lawn fertilizers are built around fixing, which is why a bag of standard lawn fertilizer will often green up a yellow lawn regardless of what actually caused the yellowing, simply because nitrogen shortage is so common that treating for it works more often than not. Overwatering, underwatering, soil compaction from heavy foot traffic, fungal disease, and insect damage from grubs or chinch bugs can all cause yellowing too, each with a somewhat different pattern and each requiring a completely different fix. But there's one specific cause that most people never even consider, and it's the one Epsom salt actually addresses directly: magnesium deficiency. Here's the part that surprises most people when they first learn it. Chlorophyll, the molecule responsible for the green color in every single blade of grass on your lawn, is built around a single magnesium atom sitting at the very center of the molecule's structure. This isn't a minor supporting role the way some nutrients play a background part in plant health. Magnesium is structurally required for the chlorophyll molecule to exist at all, the same way iron is structurally required for the hemoglobin molecule in your own blood. Without adequate magnesium available in the plant, chlorophyll production drops measurably. Photosynthesis becomes less efficient across the entire plant, and the grass visibly pales or yellows, particularly in the older, more established blades first. Since the plant will pull available magnesium toward newer growth at the expense of older tissue when supply runs short, Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate, roughly 10% magnesium and 13% sulfur by weight. When you dissolve it in water and apply it to soil that's actually deficient in magnesium, the grass has immediate access to a nutrient it was structurally missing, and it uses that magnesium to ramp chlorophyll production back up to normal levels. Sulfur plays a supporting role here too. It's a building block for several amino acids and enzymes the plant needs for healthy overall growth and energy production. And a sulfur shortfall stacked on top of a magnesium shortfall compounds the yellowing you see on the surface. Now, here's where I have to stop and be completely honest with you, because this is the part most videos on this topic skip entirely, and it's genuinely the most important part of the whole video. Epsom salt only helps grass that is actually magnesium deficient. If your soil already has adequate magnesium, which a lot of soils do, especially soils that have been regularly fertilized or amended with compost over the years, adding more magnesium does essentially nothing for color. Applying it repeatedly without an actual reason can also throw off the broader nutrient balance in your soil over time. Since every mineral in soil exists in relationship to every other mineral, and dumping in more of one without need can interfere with how the plant absorbs others. This is not a universal lawn fix that works regardless of the underlying cause. This is a targeted correction for one specific, identifiable deficiency, and it will do nothing measurable for a lawn that's yellow for any other reason. Sandy soils, soils that have been heavily leached by years of rainfall carrying nutrients down past the root zone, and soils with a naturally low pH are the ones most likely to actually be short on magnesium in practice. Old, heavily weathered soils and soils with a pH below roughly 5.5 are particularly prone to this specific deficiency. If your soil doesn't fall into one of those categories, Epsom salt is very unlikely to be the reason your yellow grass turns green. And you need to look at nitrogen levels, your watering schedule, soil compaction, or disease pressure instead of reaching for this product out of habit. So before you do anything else, get a soil test. A basic kit costs around $10 to $15 at any garden center, hardware store, or online retailer. Takes about 5 minutes to run at your kitchen table and will tell you your magnesium level along with your pH and often your levels of the major nutrients too, giving you a genuinely complete picture of what's actually going on beneath the surface rather than guessing. If the test comes back showing low magnesium, you're in exactly the situation Epsom salt is designed to fix. And everything I'm about to walk you through will apply directly and predictably to your specific lawn. If it doesn't show a deficiency, save your $5 and address whatever the test actually flags as the real underlying problem instead of reaching for a product that isn't going to help. There's also a simple visual check you can do while you wait on a proper soil test, though it's genuinely less precise and shouldn't replace an actual test if you want to be sure. Look closely at the yellowing pattern on individual blades of grass, ideally with a magnifying glass or just very close attention in good light. Magnesium deficiency classically shows up as yellowing that appears between the leaf veins, while the veins themselves stay noticeably green, sometimes accompanied by a reddish or purplish tinge along the edges of older blades. Specifically, if your whole lawn is instead uniformly pale with no vein pattern visible at all, and younger growth looks just as affected as older growth, that pattern is more consistent with straightforward nitrogen deficiency, which Epsom salt will not fix under any circumstances. Because Epsom salt contains no nitrogen whatsoever and was never designed to address a nitrogen shortfall. Assuming your soil test does show a genuine magnesium shortfall, here's exactly how to apply it, step by step. The standard ratio is 2 tablespoons of Epsom salt per gallon of water for spot treatment of specific yellow patches, or roughly 3 pounds of Epsom salt per 1,250 square feet of lawn if you're treating the whole yard, because the test showed the deficiency is widespread rather than isolated to one section. Dissolve it completely in water. Epsom salt dissolves easily, much more readily than some other mineral amendments you might have used before. So a few minutes of stirring in warm water is usually enough to get a fully clear solution with nothing settling at the bottom of the bucket. You can apply it with a regular pump sprayer for spot treatments of individual yellow patches, or with a hose end sprayer or a broadcast spreader using the granular form if you're covering the whole yard at once. Because the test showed widespread deficiency rather than an isolated patch, unlike the iron sulfate application I covered in an earlier video, Epsom salt doesn't require the same precision about drift onto concrete, pavers, or hardscaping around the edges of your lawn. It won't stain anything the way iron sulfate does, and it's genuinely one of the lowest risk amendments you can put down on a lawn, which is honestly part of why it survived as a piece of gardening folklore. Even in situations where a soil test would show it isn't actually doing anything useful for that particular yard, because the downside of trying it and being wrong is essentially zero. Water it in thoroughly after application, whether you used the liquid or granular form. So the magnesium and sulfur move down through the thatch layer and into the root zone where the grass roots can actually access them. Rather than sitting on the surface and washing away or evaporating before the plant benefits, now let's talk honestly about the timeline, because this is exactly where a lot of the content out there oversells what to realistically expect, and I don't want to add to that. If your yellowing genuinely was caused by magnesium deficiency, most people who apply this correctly and track the results report seeing a noticeable improvement in color within 1 to 2 weeks, not within 72 hours, the way some titles and thumbnails promise. Grass responding to a nutrient correction is a fundamentally slower biological process than grass responding to something like an iron overdose, killing off competing weeds outright, which produces a much faster and more visually dramatic reaction within a couple of days. A nutrient deficiency correction works differently. The plant has to actually take up the mineral, transport it to where it's needed, and use it to build new chlorophyll molecules over the course of ongoing growth, which takes real time regardless of how quickly the mineral itself dissolves and enters the soil. Some, especially deficient lawns, do show a quicker partial response, and I've seen credible accounts of visible improvement starting within just a few days on turf that was severely obviously deficient rather than mildly deficient. But treat 1 to 2 weeks as the honest, realistic expectation for most cases rather than banking on a guaranteed 72-hour transformation. Because setting that expectation wrong is exactly how people give up on a treatment that was actually working, just more slowly than they were told to expect. You can reapply roughly once a month during the active growing season if a follow-up soil test confirms the deficiency is ongoing or your soil type is prone to leaching magnesium quickly. But there's no additional benefit to applying more frequently than that, and doing so provides zero additional greening once the actual deficiency has been corrected. More magnesium beyond what the plant actually needs doesn't make grass any greener than fully corrected grass already is. It just sits unused in the soil, potentially building up over multiple seasons in ways that eventually create their own imbalance. Here's something else worth knowing, honestly, before you decide whether this is worth trying. Epsom salt is essentially pH neutral, sitting right around 7.0 on the scale. So unlike lime or elemental sulfur amendments that are specifically used to shift soil pH up or down, Epsom salt won't meaningfully change your soil's acidity or alkalinity one way or the other, regardless of how much you apply. That's actually a genuine point in its favor, if your pH is already sitting in a good range for grass, and you just need to correct a magnesium shortfall without accidentally disturbing anything else about your soil chemistry in the process. There is also research showing that Epsom salt can actually decrease seed germination rates under some conditions. So if you're overseeding bare patches at the same time, you're treating for yellowing elsewhere in the yard. Keep the Epsom salt solution well away from the freshly seeded areas until that new grass is established and has developed real root systems. Salts of any kind, even relatively mild and generally beneficial ones like magnesium sulfate, can interfere with the delicate osmotic balance that seeds rely on during germination. Before the plant has roots established enough to handle mineral exposure the way mature grass can, let me tell you what happened when I actually tested this on my own lawn. Because I think the honest, specific result matters a lot more to you right now than a generic promise that this works. I had a section along the back fence line that had gone consistently pale yellow-green for 2 summers running, clearly distinct from the rest of the yard, which stayed in normal. Healthy, deep green the entire time without any special attention on my part. I assumed it was a watering issue at first, since that section sits slightly higher than the rest of the property and drains faster, which seemed like the obvious explanation. I adjusted the sprinkler coverage specifically for that section for an entire growing season, running it longer and more frequently than the rest of the yard. No real change in color by the end of that season. Then I ran a proper soil test specifically on that patch, using 2 separate sample bags so I could compare it directly against a sample pulled from the healthy part of the yard just 20 feet away. The patch along the fence line came back with a genuinely low magnesium reading, noticeably lower than the healthy section, which tested completely normal on the same scale. That was the first real clue I'd had in 2 years that the problem was never actually about water. I mixed a solution at 2 tablespoons per gallon and treated just that patch, watering it in thoroughly afterward the same evening. Nothing dramatic happened in the first few days, and I'll be honest with you, I almost wrote the whole experiment off as another dead end after a week of watching closely and seeing basically nothing. By about day 10, though, the color difference between that patch and the surrounding lawn was clearly starting to narrow. Close enough that I had to walk right up to the fence line to still see any distinction at all. By 2 weeks, that patch had essentially caught up to the rest of the lawn, matching the healthy green around it closely enough that you'd need to know exactly where to look, and exactly what you were looking for to tell the 2 areas apart at all. Total cost for that fix was less than $1's worth of product. out of a $5 box that still has plenty left over for next season's use. It wasn't a miracle, and it wasn't instant the way some of these videos promise. But it was real. It was genuinely cheap. And it addressed something that a full season of carefully adjusting my watering schedule had completely failed to touch, because the actual problem was never water in the first place. It was a nutrient the grass simply didn't have enough of. One more honest note before I let you go, because I think it's the single most useful thing in this entire video if you take only one thing away from it. If you've already tried Epsom salt on your whole lawn without running a soil test first, and you didn't see any real change in color after a couple of weeks of waiting, that's not a failure of the method or a sign you did something wrong in your application technique. That's very likely a clear sign your soil was never actually magnesium deficient to begin with. And the yellowing you're dealing with has a completely different underlying cause that needs a completely different fix entirely. Don't keep dumping more Epsom salt on a problem it was never designed to solve in the first place, hoping that more product will eventually do what a little bit didn't. Test first. Treat second. That order matters more than almost anything else covered in this entire video. And skipping straight to treatment without testing is the single most common reason people end up disappointed with a product that, used correctly on the actual right problem, genuinely does work exactly the way I've described. If you found this genuinely useful, watch the next video and don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next one.